Welcome to Channel AMEC, your insight to the Australian visa system. Good day everyone, my name is Carl Yang, your online YouTube visa consultant. Are you interested about migrating to Australia? Why don't you consider to subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell on the side, so once we have all the updates, you'll be the first one getting all the insight. Now obviously we have moved into the end of 2021 and got all the updates done up to date. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna compare two of the most confused not just visa but status that a lot of people really confused, especially they have not been in Australia yet, but they are planning to migrate to Australia. So obviously it's the differences between the criteria between the differences of the permanent residence and the renewal of permanent resident and becoming a citizen of Australia. So obviously there is a requirement of residence, meaning that you have to be in Australia, but the two types of criteria is actually different. So if you're already is a permanent resident, to renew a permanent resident visa is way different than becoming a citizen of Australia. So let's jump in there and have a look. And obviously I know a lot of people after watching are still confused. No problem, leave a comment right down below. I can answer you one by one. Okay, so first of all, if you are already a permanent resident, generally what you need to do is, obviously you know the PR expires after 5 years, and all you need to do is renew. So the renewal criteria is different. Now why is there a criteria for renewal? Well, first of all, because a right given to a resident or citizen is different than visa condition given to a visa holder. Visa holder is considered as an alien in the Constitution, but if you're a permanent resident, you're no longer an alien. Obviously you hold the right as a citizen who actually live in that country. So the right can only be abandoned or forfeit by the citizen or resident him or herself. It cannot be rejected and it cannot be taken away by the way of how Constitution is drafted. So obviously there is a way that required to be renewed, and how the law does this is that the only way for a person to actually forfeit or abandon his or her permanent resident is not meeting the renewal criteria. So let's have a look how you can actually renew. The renewing visa of PR is called resident return visa under the subclass 155 and 157, and it's not costly. You can look at this, it's very cheap compared to a lot of visas which is thousands and thousands of dollars. So let's have a look at the eligibility. Okay, so you have to be either, you need to be a permanent resident already, so then you can renew, or perhaps you are a former permanent resident who last permanent visa was not cancelled, or you are a former Australian citizen. Okay, so obviously you gotta be, you need to be a PR or prior to be a PR in order to actually launch this renewal of resident return visa. There is no age limit, that's for sure, and the minimum resident and substantial time required. So here is the differences. Now becoming a citizen is different than the criteria to actually renew your permanent residence. So renewing your permanent resident is, you have to show, first of all, there's options, one and all the others. Let's talk about the first one. First one is you have to live 2 years within the last 5 years. So obviously that's encountered with a total of 730 days. It doesn't have to be continually. Okay, you can stay 100 days in the first year, 200 days in the second year, and then 300 days for the third year, and then and goes on further. Okay, and in order to actually meet that 2 years. Now bear in mind, if you are a permanent resident and you are unsure, meaning that you are in Australia, even if the visa expires, you will still have the lawful right to continue to stay. So for example, if your permanent residence is about to expire in a week, and you decided to purchase a ticket and fly in Australia, and you stay there, then you don't need to renew. You can continue, even if the visa expires, you can continue to live in Australia until you actually meet that 2-year mark. That means 730 days continuously. Then all you need to do is you renew your permanent resident under the subclass 155, and then you will meet that 2-year residency requirement, and then immigration will provide you a further 5-year visa. So you don't have to renew upon the arrival, even though your visa expires. But for the best practice, you always wanted to renew anyway. Okay. So if you're outside Australia, there's also a way to do it. So not absent for 5 continuous years or more before data application, unless a compelling reason. Now, obviously, the compelling reason can be, first of all, you've been working offshore. There's a lot of demonstrative work that you cannot be in Australia. Then you can actually still get your permanent resident there, and you held your PR, but not subsequently lost your citizenship. Be able to demonstrate substantial tie to Australia that are benefit to Australia, which is in case that only given a maximum 12 months. So there's another way of doing this. So this is be outside Australia. So this actually how do you read this? This is really confusing. So this part is given to this. Okay. So that actually given, if you're not in Australia, you show there is a compelling reason. For example, you're in an international firm, you're required to work overseas. Okay, and the other way is you're still outside Australia, and you were a citizen or permanent resident for the last less than 10 years before, and not absent period equate to 5 years, and be able to demonstrate substantial tie. So either of this one require to demonstrate substantial tie. Okay, now substantial tie can be, we'll have a look at that later. Being Australian, able to demonstrate that you're Australian are benefit to Australia, and not being absent of 5 continuous years since granted visa reason permanent resident when you start being Australian citizen, in which in case a given maximum 12 months. Again, if you haven't been there for 2 years, they're basically giving you 12 months, and same as here for members of family. In calculating residency requirement, here we go, that's a 730 days, which equate to what I just said. 5 years period counting back, so it's counting like if you are applying today, it's on the 24th of December 2021, it counts back 5 years, and then see within this 5 years how many days you actually be in Australia. Now substantial tie, there's a lot. Let's jump in there and have a look. I'm not too sure why they are copying this and this with exactly the same words, but having the two, don't know, web design problem. Anyway, it's the same. So business ties means that you still have business in Australia, and you have compelling reason not to be in Australia due to work or employment. Cultural ties, meaning that you have been joining some association in Australia and require. And cultural ties sometimes can be connected to business ties as well, because some association might have business contact, business connection as well. Employment ties. So are you employed by an Australian entity? And the personal ties is easily will be family ties. So as long as that's set it up, that's all fine. Now, not hold an authority to return or return endorsement. You are not eligible for RRV if you hold transitional permanent resident. Okay, that's rarely. Now look at this dates. That's all the dated stuff. I haven't seen anyone holding this kind of stuff anyway. Now obviously you need to meet character requirements, so you haven't there's no major criminal conduct that you have done previously. So that's basically for the renewal of permanent residence. Now let's check out how you can actually become an Australian citizen. Okay, so it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. The residency requirement is actually harder than renewing a permanent resident. Okay, so a permanent resident, everyone, including application, must be permanent resident. So if you want to become a citizen, you have to be first a permanent resident, then you will become a citizen. Now, if you're eligible New Zealand citizen, that is that you have arrived and continuously stay in Australia as your permanent home before on or about February 26, 2001, then you can actually get that done. Rarely, I haven't seen any client like this, but if you're like this one, you might consider to become a citizen of Australia. Now, resident requirement. Now, you need to meet these. Okay, so first of all, the general requirements at the time of you applying, you have been living in Australia with the valid visa. Now, the visa doesn't have to be permanent resident for the past 4 years. Okay, so that's first thing. So away from Australia, no more than 12 months. Okay, so that's, if we calculate that and divide it into 4 years, meaning 90 days each year. Okay, 90 days each year, so you cannot be away from Australia. Now, the second criteria is that your residency start on the day and you granted permanent resident that you're in Australia or you're first entering Australia. So obviously you got to be in with a permanent resident status and the general exemptions. Now, bear in mind there is also a 12-month requirement to be a permanent resident. So your residence start on the day. Calculate your permanent residence. So how they do this is we grant a permanent residence when you arrive and you first enter Australia on a permanent residence. So you need to be a permanent resident for the last 12 months. So giving you an example, it's easier to do this. So you may hold a work visa for the past 3 years. And you meet the requirement to become a permanent resident, so then you become a permanent resident on the 4th year, and then you live for another 12 months as a permanent resident. So altogether, you have stayed in Australia for more than 12 months, and your last visa held was a permanent resident and held at least 12 months. Then that will meet the requirements. So that's how simple it is, although it's a little bit confusing, but anyway, that's how that they calculate. General exemptions, so that's for the kids. So if you're kids, no problem. And you will also be given document support if you join the Australian Defence Force. No, well, I'm not saying that to get your citizenship quicker. Just to join Defence Force. I mean, that's not the way to do it. There's a ministerial discretion. Now that's very hard. I personally haven't seen anyone like this. So you got to be very, very contributory to the nation, and a special resident requirement for activities. That's for the sports people, because sports people, international sports people, athletes, they travel a lot because they may not meet the residency requirements. So that's for that one. So character requirement, again, you need to show you a good character, you have some knowledge of Australia, language requirement, things like that. So basically, now how we conclude this is, first of all, if you're a permanent resident, you want to renew your permanent residency, there's 2 ways. One is obviously show that you have been living at least 730 days in the past 5 years. You'll be able to renew for another 5 years of permanent resident. Or you can show, if you haven't been doing 730 days staying in Australia, you will show compelling reason with substantial ties. Now we've gone through substantial ties. There's a business, there's cultural, there's a personal, there's all these ties that you can show that you still have a ties in Australia, and employment ties. Okay, now if you wanted to become a citizen, it's different. Okay, you have to show, first of all, you being in Australia for 4 years with a valid visa. Okay, now the first 3 years can be any visa, can be work visa, can be student visa, and your last year has to be a permanent resident, and you cannot be away from Australia for a total of 360 days. So that means 90 days each year. So 4 years continuously living in Australia, you'll be able to transfer yourself to be a Australian citizen. Anyway, should you have more question query, more than welcome to leave a comment right down below, and I see you next video. Goodbye.